Okay, now, so part two on the threshold covenant and the richness of the Passover rite. I mean, because we have always thought, I have always thought the blood on the lintel, the blood on the doorpost meant that the angel of death would pass by because the sacrifice had been, the Israelites had accepted the sacrifice and the command to sacrifice, and they had done it, and they were in there eating their lamb, and so the angel of death would pass by. Well, actually, the Hebrew word is pass over or cross. It can even mean limp, because I guess maybe if you passed over you too vigorously, you developed a limp. I don't know. But anyway, it actually means, it's a picture of passing over a threshold. Threshold, the Hebrew word for threshold is saf. In most instances where it's used in the Hebrew scriptures, it is used as threshold or door or doorpost. That's the way it's translated. But it also is translated basin a couple of times or cup. Well, the writer of this book says perhaps that is because maybe even at the threshold where all these sacrifices were made, the threshold of the home, there was a dug out area of earth where the blood ran into, like a basin. So threshold, basin. Fascinating that would be even the word used to describe the entrance to a door is basin. It can also mean basin. That speaks volumes. Okay, so I wanted to also bring in some examples of these historical things that will show you, shed more light on this whole thing. So we established that blood was sacred, that was like inviting the deity when you had a rite that had to do with shedding of blood. You were automatically inviting the deity. Now, an example of this rite would be like the Shah or the Caliph, in Persia and the Middle East. When he would come into a city, the people would make ready their sacrifices, especially the ones who knew he was coming to their home. They would have to have that sacrifice ready to slaughter at the threshold of their home before the Shah or the dignity came in. Now, with his retinue, and he would be on a big white horse or whatever, but behind him was his executioner who would execute you if you did not have the sacrifice ready to offer at the threshold of your home when he knocked on your door. And this is also very telling about what was going on at the Passover in Egypt, because the angel of death, you see, is pictured in that executioner role, which would have been common in those cultures then. The execution was behind the deity, the dignitary, So here at the Passover, the first Passover, we have Yahweh coming to pass over your threshold and covenant meal and eat a covenant meal with you and establish you as his people, because that's what was happening. This was the birth of Israel on the Passover night. The covenant, it was even a marriage covenant, which I will explain to you also about how these cultures covenanted in marriage. It has to do with the same kind of threshold covenant. Anyway, but behind Yahweh would have been his executioner, quote, or the angel of death. So if the sacrifice hadn't been made and the blood was not on the lintel, the doorpost of the home, then the executioner had the right to execute you in those cultures. Is this not beautiful? It was so much more. It is so much more than that the angel of death passes you by. It's that Yahweh is coming into your home to covenant with you. Now we'll talk about the marriage next time, because it says more.